an experience of seeing trees. Huh? Yeah. Right. Thursday, no one came to the class. Thursday last, no one came. Ariella wasn't there. 770 was full of people. So I didn't give a class. That you got people are complaining, how come you didn't give the class? That was you. Right. Okay, I think it's this. Anyway, Baruch Hashem. From the Gula. Yeah, but you have to have a chush in technology, and it's not her thing. Okay, now listen, I got so much to learn in so little time. It's a long Maamar. It's 13 pages, technically. But you know how the Maamar works is 5 pages of kashas, 5 pages of questions. You know, you're not allowed to be smart when you learn Chassidus. You're supposed to learn and understand, but when you look at this Maamar, there are a few things that to me are quite clear about the Maamar. And again, I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm very wrong, and if I'm very wrong, it's bad. But this is how I see the Maamar. That's how I see the Maamar. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background. If you look at the Maamarim of the Rebbe over the years, they change a lot. The first 10 years was one form. The next 10 years was something like in the middle. But as the Nesias wears on, the Maamarim change often, a lot. On one level, the way they change is the Rebbe starts to speak more of his own. In the earlier years, he would push to repeat Maamarim from the earlier Rabbeim. And even then, the Rebbe would summarize and make it clear and crisp, and he would make many changes. But the first 10 years, he's Pashat saying all the classic Maamarim from the earlier Rabbeim. The Rebbe chose the best Maamarim of Chabad and said them during the first decade of his Nesias, Merveinikir. As the years of the Nesias passed, the Rebbe began to say much more of his own Maamarim. They reflect more of him. Like I always tell you, that the Rebbe starts the Maamar with hameitzar ikir. What's the avodah? Before the Maamar even begins, he wants to know what's the bottom line. But there's another very serious factor. And that is that the Maamarim began to be published. Most of the Rabbeim, when they said Chassidus, they based it on the Rabbeim before. But we didn't know. Not only we did not know what it was based on, we didn't know that it was based on the Maamar of the Friedrich Rabbeim. My Shver, all of our Shalom, used to tell me all the time that when the Friedrich Rebbe left Russia, Reb Nissen Nemenov asked the Friedrich Rebbe to leave the Maamar that he said Simchas Torah. The Rebbe left the day after Simchas Torah. That's how he told me the story. It's a little bit hard to understand, but that's what he told me, that the Reb Nissen asked that the Rebbe should leave him the Maamar of Simchas Torah. So the Rebbe said to him, get a bacher, and I'll show him from which bichlach to copy, a piece from here and a piece from here. So that's what they did. They got a bacher, and the bacher copied different shtikalach, and then the Friedrich Rebbe made the glue, the connections, and completed the Maamar. Then the Friedrich Rebbe asked Reb Nissen which bacher he gave it to make all these copies. So Reb Nissen told the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Friedrich Rebbe was happy. Weil nicht jeder da wissen wie a Maamar stellt sich zu neuf. That's the quote. Not everybody has to know how Maamar is constructed, because Maamarim are very, very loyal to the earlier generation. Sichas are different, but Maamarim have a very distinctive form. All the Rabbeim follow the same form. And the Rabbeim are really saying the same Maamarim with their own priorities, their own emphases, their own additional explanations or clarifications, but the Maamarim. So before the Maamarim were in print, the Rebbe said Maamarim like the earlier Rabbeim. But as soon as the Rebbe started printing Maamarim, the Rebbe began to say shorter Maamarim. Because he would say, Yedua, Drusha, Rabbi Seidin, Nesiyenu. The Rebbe would start every Maamar by saying, what I'm saying you already know because it's already in print. That style started in the last decade, this is the MEMS, the 80s, maybe the late 70s, when the Rebbe started printing Maamarim, the Rebbe began to refer to Maamarim. He wouldn't say a Maamar, he referred. So if the Maamar is already in print, from the Alter Rebbe, from the Middle Rebbe, from Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe didn't repeat in long form the whole Maamar. He just said a summary of the Maamar and what he wanted to add. That's the way the Maamarim that we learned in the last years were short so often, because there's this style of Yeduim, Rosh Rabbi said, here's the Maamar for Rosh Hashanah, Tavshan Lamed Ches. And the Maamar is based on a Maamar that had just been printed from the Rebbe Rashab Tov Reish Ayin Ches. It was 60 years since 1918, Tov Reish Ayin Ches, 1978, 1918 is 60 years, and for the 60th anniversary of Tov Reish Ayin Ches, they printed the Sefer. And the Rebbe says this Maamar based on the Maamar in Tov Reish Ayin Ches, and as a result, the Rebbe is very makatzer. The Rebbe is very concise in referencing the Maamar of Reish Ayin Ches. The Maamar of Reish Ayin Ches is very long. It's actually a hemshech. It's many pages. I forgot how long. It's 20 pages. It's a long Maamar. The Rebbe is very, very concise in quoting the Maamar of Tov Reish Ayin Ches, and I suspect that this is already Vibizak. The Rebbe is saying, you could look it up yourself, even though the Rebbe is very clear about the points he brings to the Maamar Reish Ayin Ches. But a half a Maamar is a Hakdama. 6 pages. The whole Maamar is 12 pages and a little bit. A half a Maamar is a Hakdama. And the Hakdama is so long. What we're going to learn today, it's a lot of pages. Because the Rebbe speaks and speaks and speaks and speaks about the same idea. He's so elaborate. The Hakdama to the Maamar starts, the Reish Ayin Ches is on the bottom of page Ches. On the bottom of page Ches, he's mitzayin to min hameitzar. And you could almost say that that's where the Maamar starts. So the first 6 hamudim, which is half a Maamar be'erech, is an introduction to the min hameitzar. Again, I don't know what the Rebbe is thinking. So b'meila, we don't know for sure the kavanah shabadava. But the second half of the Maamar is hard. It's very concise. The Rebbe says so many things in so few pages. The first half of the Maamar is so easy because he's so meidich. And what's the nekuda? The nekuda is that the Yidden are in such a good condition before Rosh Hashanah comes, we beklal don't understand what Rosh Hashanah is about. Before Rosh Hashanah comes, the Maamar is so unbelievably positive. Before Rosh Hashanah comes, the Yidden are in such a high Maamar Matziv. So exactly what are we worried about, kind of thing. And then the second half of the Maamar, which I'm going to learn Thursday, Mr. Shem, I don't know how much we'll cover it, but I don't know if we'll finish it. In other words, this Maamar may take 3 classes, but today my plan is to learn half a Maamar. Why? Because in the first half of Maamar, the Rebbe is going to speak about 5 things. 5 things. Okay? There's a pasuk, which we say in the beginning of Tchiyas. Min hameitzar karasi ka almani b'merchav ka. That when Rosh Hashanah comes, Yidden are min hameitzar. So he's going to speak about the Yidden, who are called Eretz, and he's going to question the min hameitzar. He's going to speak about Eretz Yisrael, which is called Eretz, and he's going to question the min hameitzar there. He's going to speak about Teireh Shabal Peh, which is also called Eretz. He's going to question the min hameitzar there. He's going to speak about Rosh Hashanah, and he's going to question the min hameitzar there. And he's going to speak about the pasuk min hameitzar itself and question the pasuk min hameitzar. In other words, the Rebbe is going to bring a pasuk and challenge it in 5 ways. When it comes to Rosh Hashanah, you're dealing with Yidden, you're dealing with Eretz Yisrael, you're dealing with Teireh Shabal Peh, you're obviously dealing with Rosh Hashanah, and you're obviously quoting the pasuk min hameitzar. 5 times, the Rebbe is going to ask the same question. How could it come Rosh Hashanah? The Yid says min hameitzar, a Yid in a narrow situation, and he's calling out HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he's hoping that the Eibush is going to answer him by Merchav. When Rosh Hashanah comes, you're in a great state. So the Maamar is unbelievably, the first half, unbelievably positive. And the kasha is, what kind of chesaron can a Yid have when Rosh Hashanah comes, that he should scream to the Eibush min hameitzar, I find myself in a narrow situation. We say also shelamas mimamakim. But mimamakim is not the same thing as min hameitzar, right? Mimamakim could be a positive oimik. But min hameitzar means that Yid is in a narrow, he's in a Mitzrayim, Yid is in a narrow situation. And the Rebbe is going to ask 5 times, how could you say about a Yid, he's min hameitzar, he's in a wonderful Maamar Matziv. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Like I said, the first half of this Maamar is extraordinarily easy because it's so arichesdik. The second half of the Maamar is very bekitzer. It's very, very concise. And the Rebbe has a gewaldige point that he makes in this Maamar based on a medrash, which I'm hoping to introduce today, if time will allow. We're dealing with the illness of the clock, and then we'll do tomorrow, Thursday. Tomorrow is Wednesday. I don't come with Donnershtik. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. This is the first of the 8 psukim that we say before Tkiyah Shofar, that a Yid cries out to Hashem from a narrowness, and he begs that Hashem should answer him with a breath. And of course, the assumption is that the degree of the narrowness of the cry determines the degree of the breadth of the response. If the narrowness is more, the breath that comes after it is going to be greater. If the narrowness is less, then the breath that's going to come after it is going to be less. In other words, the worse situation you're in, the better the situation becomes afterwards. And of course, the pshat is, you're holding a shofar, the shofar is narrow on one hand and wide on the other, and fakert, it's the narrowness of one end of the shofar that produces the coil. So you say, hameitzar, Yid cries out because it's a narrow situation, and he's hoping that the Eibush is going to answer. There's a great wonderment in saying this pasuk, as we say this pasuk. Listen to this. We went through so many steps. Elul, Slichas, Leil Rosh Hashanah. The whole morning of Rosh Hashanah. A Yid calls out from Hashem to Hashem, as always in a narrow situation. But it's a fact that even before Rosh Hashanah came in, every Jew was given a good year. Doesn't medish, before Rosh Hashanah begins, every Jew was given a good year. What does it say in Lashon? Leifshim levanim, umisatzim levanim. You put on white clothing, you represent a white shawl. Because we know Hashem is going to make a nes. So if before Rosh Hashanah we're so certain that the Eibush is going to give us a good year, so what's the crying out in Rosh Hashanah ben hameitzar? Ve'ein leima, you cannot say shatam shebetuchem be'erev Rosh Hashanah, that our certainty erev Rosh Hashanah, sheyisku, but then we're going to have a good year, is lefisha yedim, because we know shebe Rosh Hashanah tiyah habakasha de ben hameitzar, that Rosh Hashanah we're going to cry out ben hameitzar, and shayada yiyachakach onani b'mercha, that we know before Rosh Hashanah, then Rosh Hashanah will blow shofar, and we're going to cry out, and the Eibush is going to answer us. In other words, that Erev Rosh Hashanah, we're sure that our cry of the next day is going to be effective. Says the Rebbe, skip the next line. Ki, b'shvil lisches bedin. In order for Yidden to win the case, listen to these words. Dai umaspik. It's sufficient and it's enough. V'hoiser, and even more. The Rebbe says, what we did, listen, imagine how the Rebbe is coming to Rosh Hashanah, and he's saying Torah. He's bringing rayas from Torah. He's not bringing rayas. The Rebbe didn't do a social study about how Hasidim prepared themselves for Rosh Hashanah. Right? The Rebbe is speaking divrei Torah. In other words, Torah is keveya the Metzias. Torah is establishing the fact. What's the fact? That before Rosh Hashanah, the Eibush gave Yidden kol tuv. Dehine b'chei deshala vaydi b'shleimus. When Elul comes, we serve Hashem perfectly. Farvas. We start out avodas Hashem by us coming to Hashem and Hashem responding to us. Initiate and only afterwards the Eibush responds v'deidili. No, so if we come to Hashem and El to do tshuva when Rosh Hashanah comes, of course we've been forgiven. 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Especially Ben Azak, and he brings the mashal of Melech Basada, and he brings the whole mashal of the Melech Basada, that the king comes to the field and he's so available, and of course then the Rebbe says 5 lines from the bottom of when he comes to the city, which is Chedesh Tishrei, they follow the king into the city and into the palace. V'kiven, and since Cha'az that during Elul, Yachol Kol Misha Reitz L'Hak upon if anybody wants to be David's king. Look at 3 lines about him. Hine Bavra David. There's no question. Shokolechad mi Yisrael that every year skip the parenthesis. If you have an opportunity to meet the king, you certainly met him. So the Rebbe said, if the Eibishter gave Yidden a Chodesh Elul, a matzav of Melech Basada, we certainly took advantage. What's the Rebbe's raya? What the Rebbe studied what's going on in Bis Medrash? Because it says in Teirah, Teirah says it's Melech Basada, so certainly every year they approach the king. Turn the page. That before Rosh Hashanah, Yidden are standing with a certitude. Turn the page. That we read this Pasha Elam Kedim Rosh Hashanah. That what? That every Yid is standing victorious in judgment. Teirah is eternal. Every year, in every place. Even before Rosh Hashanah, you have Atam Mitzav Lifnei Hashem Elokecha. And it says in the next pasuk, now, of course, the word that's repeated again and again, which is neged to Rosh Hashanah, is the word Hayom. I told this to you in the previous Maamar. Hayom goes on Rosh Hashanah. And when it comes like Atan Nitavim Hayom, it means the Yid is victorious, is vindicated in judgment on Rosh Hashanah, and we say this before Rosh Hashanah. 4 lines into the page. We make a covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when you make a covenant, the 2 entities in the covenant become one. If before Rosh Hashanah, Yidden and Hashem are one. So the Rebbe brings the Lashon Harei Be'er Pnei Melachayim. Be'er Pnei Melachayim means literally, the light of the face of the king brings life. Be'er Pnei Melachayim is a concept that has a cultural, historic significance. A person is being tried for a crime, even if the punishment is death. If on the way to the gallows he meets the king, he's pardoned. Be'er Pnei Melech, when you encounter the face of the king, Chayim, there's life. So if Yidden are one with the Eibishter, we're all in a Maamar D'Matzav of Be'er Pnei Melech. So the Rebbe says, before Rosh Hashanah, it's already been determined that we're going to have a good year. Hashem rules everything, including it's a certainty. Didn't bother, there was an explicit psak. Yidden are going to have children, health, and parnasa. And abundant parnasa, abundant health, abundant children. Abish's great hand. Says the Rebbe, if Hashem provides for the whole world, He certainly provides for Yidden. Then He says, you have the place. Especially Yidden. First of all, they're called Bnei Melachim, the children of kings. And then the Rebbe brings from the Zayad, they're called Gam Melachim, kings. Which is emphasizing even more the idea of being a prince or being a king. 6 lines from the end of the paragraph. Hashem asks us that we should make him into a king, which of course is very strange, because the whole idea of a king is that the subjects choose him. If a king chooses to be a king, then he's not a king, he's a politician, he's a dictator. The Eibishter wants to be a melech, but Kayachal, he can't make himself a melech. We have to make a melech. So he asks us, please make me a melech. Choose me willingly. Right? And then the Rebbe says, that's what we say, the psukim. And the reason it works is because since Yidden are themselves b'nei melachim, or melachim, so when we ask the Eibishter to be our melech, he agrees. Says the Rebbe Eliezer, b'nei melachim and melachim, since we're the princes or kings. Hashem gives us everything. So now the Rebbe finishes the last 3 lines of the first paragraph. And the question is, why are we asking? What is the meaning of the request? That from the narrowness a Yid cries out, and this narrowness is going to bring a breath. It was already paskened. Hashem already gave us a good year and an abundant year. How could a Yid come Rosh Hashanah and cry out if before Rosh Hashanah he has everything he can possibly want? And there's 2 parts to the kasha. The first part of the kasha is why is it necessary? And the second part of the kasha is a person cannot cry out from the depths when his life is good. You can cry out min hameitzar when you feel oppressed, when you feel crushed. But if life is brachas, Where is the min hameitzar? So the Rebbe's kasha is why do you have to say min hameitzar? And how could you say min hameitzar? Yeah, you read 2 pages of Maamar, it sounds like the Rebbe is living, what world? Mashiach came already, all Yidden are tzaddikim, and so on and so forth. But as they state in Torah, the Rebbe takes his cue, not from what he sees in the world, but what's written in the Torah. In the Torah it says that all of these things already happened. We already greeted the king in the field, and he already greeted us with a pleasant place. We went with him into the palace, so what's the min hameitzar? 2 pages of a kasha. But the Rebbe's not done. He's going to repeat the kasha 4 more times about 4 more different things. How? Because we touched Hayoim is Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe brings now, that doesn't look at the Torah, that Hayoim also means the day we go into Eretz Yisrael. And he also implies, although he doesn't say it, that Hayoim also means the day we get the Torah. Torah Sheba'al Peh. So he's going to make a link from the Atam Mitzavim Hayoim of Rosh Hashanah to the Atam Mitzavim Hayoim of Eretz Yisrael. And then he's going to focus on the word Eretz. The first Maamar in Torah 8, he brings the pasuk, Beishis Bar Elokim Eretz Eretz. It says Eretz, 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 Shemid Var Hashem, 3 times Eretz. And Alter Rebbe teaches it means Neshamas Yisrael. It means Torah Sheba'al Peh, and it means Eretz Yisrael. So in the first paragraph, he talked about Neshamas Yisrael. How could a Yid say Min HaMeitzar if Eretz is doing wonderful? He's going to repeat the kasha 2 more times for Eretz, Eretz Yisrael. Yisrael is the land of Archava. And he's going to repeat it a 3rd time that Eretz goes on Torah Sheba'al Peh. So I'm reading it inside. Number 2, V'hinei. Neisav Alam El B'nei Geya B'nei Yisrael Atzma. You came to the Shir? Yeah. So there's copies over there. You just became 50% of the attendance. So thank you for coming. Neisav Alam El B'nei Geya B'nei Yisrael Atzma. Number 1, we talked about the Yidden. But just like we talked about Yidden, Yeshna Inyan Zeh Gam B'negei Eretz Yisrael U'B'negei Torah Sheba'al. Repeat the same question 2 more times. Yidden should not be able to say Min HaMeitzar because their life is broad. Eretz Yisrael should not be able to say Min HaMeitzar because Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Teva Rechav. And Torah Sheba'al Peh should not be able to say Min HaMeitzar because it's also believable. And the constant between Yidden and Eretz Yisrael and Torah Sheba'al Peh, they're all called Oretz. Okay? They're all connected. That Sheshloisha Nikru Eretz Yisrael, Knesset Yisrael, and then there's a long bracket and 4 lines from the top of page Hey, the Rebbe says, V'Torah Sheba'al Peh. Yidna called Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz, and Torah Sheba'al Peh is called Eretz. And if you're looking on page Hey, it says, V'kulam nirmazim b'mikra echad Eretz, 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 3 times Eretz, Shemid Var Hashem goes on Yidden, Eretz Yisrael, and Torah Sheba'al Peh. And then of course in the bracket that I skipped, the Rebbe again carries on about how wonderful Yidden are, that they're called Eretz Chayfetz. He brings the Torah Sabal Shem Tev, that just like we'll never know all the secrets that are in the earth, we're never going to know all the treasure that exists in a Yid. So the Rebbe says 5 lines on the top of page Hey. Shagam, Heim, Sheyacham, Rosh Hashanah. Just like Yidden are connected to Rosh Hashanah. And in Rosh Hashanah, every Yid says, the first pasuk we say before Tkiyas is Min HaMeitzar Karosi Ka Ononi B'Merchav Ka, that you cry out from the deep. Min HaMeitzar, from the deep, you cry out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rebbe said, how could a Yid cry out from the deep in Rosh Hashanah if before Rosh Hashanah he has all the brachas in the universe? And the Rebbe spent 2 pages explaining how all Yidden have all brachas. The Rebbe is going to say the same thing about Eretz Yisrael and about Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay, and he brings when it says so Hayem, we usually say that Hayem goes on Reish Hashanah. There's one Maamar, look at the Torah, that says Hayem is I'm 8 lines into page Hey Bishas Knisason La'aretz. When you go into it, it's also called Hayom. So it's the connection between Reish Hashanah and going into Eretz Yisrael. Just like in the world, there's Eretz Yisrael, which is called Eretz. Kach yesh gam b'shana, it's also true in the year, which is Reish Hashanah, which is also called Eretz. Umezeh move on, which leads us to understand Shabbakosh the Reish Hashanah when Rosh Hashanah comes, and a Yid cries out Min HaMeitzar V'Goymed, that he's in a narrow situation, and he's crying out HaKadosh Baruch Hu, answer me. He gam b'negei Eretz Yisrael v'teira shebal peh. Has to with Eretz Yisrael and teira shebal peh. And what the Rebbe is going to do is repeat the same questions 2 more times. The Rebbe said, when Rosh Hashanah comes, a Yid cries from a narrow place. How could a Yid on Rosh Hashanah cry from a narrow place if everything that he could possibly want, he already has been given before Rosh Hashanah? So what's the min hameitzar? Now he repeats the same thing about Eretz Yisrael. Number 3. On my page, hey, number 3. Says the Rebbe, the Hine. Okay. Shem shebenegeh b'nei Yisrael. Just like when it comes to Yidden, shesh them kol on yonah barachov, everything they could possibly want. Keinu gam b'negei Eretz Yisrael. This came to Eretz Yisrael. She eretz teva rachov. It's a good and a broad line. I got to tell you a story, because what you have here is a Maamar of the Rebbe, which he's saying Chassidus. When the Rebbe says a Maamar, it's Torah. Torah means it comes from the Eibishter. When the Rebbe says Torah, he takes it from Torah. Now, if you read a fact in Torah, when you look at your neighborhood, you look on your street, you don't see those facts being played out. The Rebbe says, excuse me, it says in Torah. That's the Metzias. You don't see it in the world. You don't have the right glasses, that kind of thing. So the Rebbe says, every Yid before Rosh Hashanah has every bracha. Why? It says in Torah. No, if it says in Torah, every Yid has every bracha before Rosh Hashanah, where's the minham? What's this pressure? Min hameitzar. So that was the same thing by I'll tell you a ma'aseh. There's a book that I read about the Holy Belzer Rebbe. It's a wonderful book called Kodesh Pi, written by one of his Gaboyim. The Belzer Rebbe passed away in 1957. That's over 60 years ago. The Hilukah Belzer. And Belzer Rebbe was a Ishalikim Kodesh. He was a godly man. You read about his life and you hear many things that sound very much like the Rebbe in a lot of areas. The guy never ate, never slept. His schedule was not normal, and he was a servant of God like you never saw. He had a lot of things he had to do every day. Until he finished them, he didn't eat. Sometimes the day passed, he didn't do them, so the next day started, he skipped his meal. It was very simple. The Hilukah Belzer, the Vadala Belzer. Anyway, but when he finally ate, he had a recipe of a soup that he himself made. The guy who wrote the book said, I tasted that soup many times, and there was nothing tasty about it, except for one thing. Every one of the items in the soup is based on a pasuk. The Belzer Rebbe made himself a recipe from Tanakh. You understand? This is tasty, and this is tasty, and this is healthy, and this is healthy. So they had the same soup every day he ate with challah and water. Everything he did was such an avodah. But everything, anyway, so there's a story where they brought him some kind of a fruit, which he ate. He almost ate nothing. And the Gabbai apologizes, this fruit is local, it's Eretz Yisrael. So it's all wrinkly and shriveled. If we had gotten it from Europe, where they normally got fruit from the Belzer Rebbe, it would have been richer and fuller. And the Belzer Rebbe said, what? The best fruits in the world are in Eretz Yisrael. It says in the pasuk that Eretz Teva Rechava, Eretz Zav Chova. So go argue with him. The fact of the matter is, the Israeli fruits were wrinkled, and the European fruits were lush and rich and full and juicy. But the Belzer Rebbe would. So the guy had to say, he had to do tshuva and repeat that the tastiest food in the world comes from Israel. It's not b'metzias, shtei chumash, cannot go to Torah. So the Rebbe does exactly the same thing. You understand? Eretz Yisrael is a very narrow place. It's still a narrow place, right? It's a small strip of land on the coast of the Mediterranean. The whole world is fighting over. You have not one day of peace. But it says in Torah, let's read it. Right? Favas. In Eretz Yisrael, it says, Eretz Teva Rechava. It's a good and a broad land. Umizeh move, and it's therefore understood. I'm on page Hey. It's 2 lines after the number 3. When you talk about Yidden, you can't say that Jews find themselves in a narrow situation. Why not? Because it says in Chumash, it doesn't look at the Torah. It says the Rebbe, you cannot say about Eretz Yisrael that's a tiny strip of land on the coast of the Mediterranean that everybody's fighting over. You can't say it's a small space. The Rebbe makes it very clear. I don't mean that after Mashiach comes, Eretz Yisrael is going to be bigger. No. The way it is right now. It says in Chumash that Eretz Yisrael is a good and expansive land. It's rich. Not but then, Eretz Yisrael is going to become even bigger. So the Rebbe says, how could Eretz Yisrael say min hameitzar? Everybody knows that Yisrael is such a teeny tiny little strip of land, and it survives with nisim gluyim. It says a chumash, right? So you can't say that a yid could say min hameitzar. A yid is rich. You can't say Eretz Yisrael is min hameitzar. Why not? Eretz Yisrael is rich. And the Rebbe says thing about Torah. Number 4. Ukshem she'etzel b'nei Yisrael, the Eretz Yisrael, when it comes to the Jewish people, and when it comes to the Holy Land, lo yishayach inyan shel meitzah, you cannot describe them as being narrow, because it says in Torah that they're so blessed. Kach gam b'Torah shebal peh, you can't say it about Torah either. Why? Lo yishayach in meitzah. Why? Because it says in the pasuk, arucha me'eretz mi derachav, Torah is infinite, and the Rebbe says that koi beikar al Torah shebal peh. Torah shebeksav is finite. We know exactly how many letters are in the Torah shebeksav. How many letters are in the Chumash? How many letters are in Tanakh? It's limited. The infinity of Torah is primarily in Torah Shebal Peh, which is called Eretz. And then you'll go, then he brings a pasuk with a chazal, Shishim Haim Malachis, 3 lines from the bottom. Alachas kama v'kama pnimiyas HaTorah. This is particularly true about Chassidus, which is called Eretz Chayfetz B'Gali, a desired land in a revealed way. The Leis Tamon, Leikusha, V'lei Machlekes, there's no questions, there's no disputes. So the Rebbe says in the last line of the page, the infinity of Torah is in general in Torah Shebal Peh, and specifically in Chassidus, in Pnimiyas HaTorah. So the question is, how could Eretz, how could Yidden, which are called Eretz Yisrael, which is called Eretz, and Torah Shebal Peh, which is called Eretz, say min hameitzar if they already have all the breath in the universe? Turn to page. Well, the question is, how can there be a cry from the narrowness? Remember, there's a big difference between the word min hameitzar and mi ma'amaka. Mi ma'amaka means from the depth, which we say the saddest we do. But min hameitzar means from the constraint, from the narrowness, from the tzimtzum. Says the Rebbe, by Yidden there's no tzimtzum, by Eretz Yisrael there's no tzimtzum, and by Torah Shebal Peh there's no tzimtzum. The mi'acha shekula miyesh inyan hamerchav. Umerchav api Torah says that they're big and broad. Merchav amiti. So what's the min hameitzar? Again, you're going to tell me that you understand why a Yid could say min hameitzar? You understand how in Eretz Yisrael Yidden could scream min hameitzar? And you understand that Yid is trying to understand that Torah Shebal Peh, and it doesn't go into his head. He also screams min hameitzar, but that's how the Rebbe sees it. Why not? In Torah it says that there's a merchav. So the Rebbe's kasha is, what is a Yid saying on Rosh Hashanah min hameitzar? If there's a merchav in the person, there's a merchav in Eretz Yisrael, and there's a merchav in Torah. Question 4. I told you before, the Rebbe is going to ask the same question 5 ways. What's the 4th way to ask the question? Rosh Hashanah itself. The 4th version of the question is when it comes to Rosh Hashanah. This is a Gemara based on a pasuk. Right? The pasuk says about Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Asher Eini Hashem Elokecha Ba. The eyes of God are upon the land. From the beginning of the year till the end of the year. How do you spell Reishis? Reish, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Tov. That Reishis is missing an Aleph. Eretz Asher Hashem Eini Hashem Elokecha Ba. The eyes of God are upon the land. Reishis, from the beginning of the year, missing an Aleph. Hashana ad achri Shana till the. Now what happens if you take Aleph out of the word Reishis? You're left with the word Tishrei. Reishis is Reish, Aleph, Shin, Yutav. Take it out Tishrei. Now this is very weird because Tishrei is Shemes HaChadoshim She'olu Imam Mibavel, right? The first Sefer of Tanakh, which mentions the names of the months, it doesn't just call them the Echad and Sheni and Shlishi, is the Megillas Esther, right? I think the names of the Chadoshim came from Bavel, from Paras. The Rebbe says not that they were created in Paras, all Imam Mibavel, they really had them before, but there's a remez in a pasuk in Chumash that the Tishrei, the Reish is Chosar Avos, Eisi is Tishrei. So the Gemara says on this, Al Torah brings us in Tanya, what's the remez of Reish is Chosar Aleph, missing the Aleph, which is Eisi is Tishrei? So the Gemara says, Eisi Kol Shana, Sheirosha B'tchilasa Misasheres B'Sefer. When a year starts out in the beginning to be poor, Rosh without an Aleph is a poor person. Just like a Dalad Lamed means a poor person, a Rosh also means a poor person. So Reish without an Aleph means impoverished. So the Gemara says, if the year starts off poor, it's going to end rich. And the poorer it is in the beginning, the richer it's going to be in the end. Now, how do we explain it at Pikabola? So Tav Shem Pei Aleph has a lot of problems. How do you explain it at Pikabola? There's no moon. The only Yom Tif, which happens in Rosh Chodesh, there's no moon, is Rosh Hashanah. So it starts off by Kesed, the moon is covered, they're very tiny. So then the Yom Chagain is going to be much bigger. Right? That's how it's understood. Or in Avoida, Rosh Hashanah, we all in a state of bittul, but we act impoverished. The Avoida of Rosh Hashanah is to act poor spiritually, and that's the keli for the bracha for the year. Right? So Rosh Hashanah has the same property of Min HaMeitzar. The Gemara says that what's the trademark of Rosh Hashanah? It's the beginning of the year, and the beginning of the year is poor. And the poorer the beginning of the year is, the richer the year that follows will be. You see, that's how it works. So Kol Shishan Rosh B'tchilasa. So the Rebbe is going to say, just like Yidden scream Min HaMeitzar, and Eretz Yisrael screams Min HaMeitzar, and Teirah Shabbat Peh screams Min HaMeitzar, and they don't have a right. Rosh Hashanah screams Min HaMeitzar, and the day doesn't either have a right. Let the Rebbe talk. And what's the Rebbe going to say? It says in Gemara that when a year starts out poor, it ends up rich. Rosh Hashanah is a day of poverty, spiritually speaking. What are you talking about? This is the richest day of the year. Same thing. You're going to bring rayas, not from our experience, not from our life. From what says in Torah, Rosh Hashanah is a very rich day. So weiter, what's the minimum? Let's read it inside. The Hiyah the Gemara says, I'm in the new paragraph, yeah? When a year is poor in the beginning, it's rich at the end, and he brings the pasuk, Meireshes Chaser, Aleph, until Achre Shana. So it says, Maamar of the Rebbe Marash, what does it mean that the year starts out poor and ends up rich? This is Min hameitzar. Rosh Hashanah, we're crying out not from the depth, but from the narrowness. That when you start out narrow, you end up rich. So there was us think about this. What does it mean that in Rosh Hashanah the year starts out poor? Everything goes back to the beginning. You know, they have in the computer reset, right? When your computer goes crazy or your phone goes crazy, they reset. What you don't know about resetting is that anytime you reset your computer, your phone, you lose all your information. You have to start from the beginning again. Reset. So you have to first download all the information, and then you hope you don't take the virus with you, and then you can reset. Rosh Hashanah, everything resets. What does it go back to? It goes back to a world. It goes back to a world before the Eibush is a king. What kind of world is there before the Eibush is a king? A world with a minimum investment. How much does Hashem need to do to give of himself to make the world? Now, you're not God and I'm not God, right? For us, it's considerable. For the Eibush, it's a few words. The real investment of the Eibush into the world is Rosh Hashanah, when he becomes a melech. Every year, it's reset. He's not a king, and we recrown him. That's the state of poverty we're in before Rosh Hashanah. Before Rosh Hashanah, Hashem stops being a king. When we blow shofar, we're going to renew his kingship. So before we blow shofar and renew his kingship, the world is in a state of poverty. Says the Rebbe, let's just find out how poor the world is. Keep reading. Right? Hainu. This is interesting. This next few lines we had in the Maamar we learned on Friday and on Sunday. Yeah. The first day of creation, Hashem is not a king. No. His investment is minimal. How much is the investment? Hashem wishes to be kind. So the first day, what's the first day? Yesterday. What happened on that day? Hashem has no interest in the world. Hashem is involved with the superficial and peripheral. But what do we have in that superficial, peripheral, limited involvement? The light that's shown on the first day, which according to Kabbalah, is the highest level of it. So when the world is in a state of poverty, I just want to tell you how poor it is. It's so poor that you have a light of Ein Seif, which Hashem later has to hide. He used a lot of fancy words. In other words, when the world is in a state of poverty, you know how rich it is? When the world is poor. You know how much the Eibush to put into this poor world? It's so Nebuch. Hashem's not a king. So what do you have? Only Echad, not Yochid. What's Echad? There's nothing but God. So the Rebbe says, V'kivan, I'm 8 lines from the bottom. Rosh Hashanah is the Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. Every year Rosh Hashanah we go back to the so-called poverty of the first day. Ube'efen Aliyos on a higher level. Whatever happened on 25th of Elul, when Hashem is not a king, yeah, He's not interested in this world, only Chafetz Chesed, happens before we blow shofar Rosh Hashanah, and we call it poor, correct? You're poor in the beginning, and then the Rebbe says 6 lines from the bottom. The truth is, you don't have to wait till the end of the year to become rich. As soon as you blow shofar, the wealth is yours. Like it says, min hameitzar. The first half of the pasuk says, min hameitzar karosi. The second half says, as soon as you blow shofar, you have all the wealth you're going to have. But before you blow shofar, you haven't blown shofar yet. The world is never poor. How poor is the world, says the Rebbe? That you have Yochad Be'elameh, there's nothing but God. And you have last line on the page. Okay, second line from the top. Page Zayed. The question is, if on the first day of creation, Hashem is not the king of the world, He's only the dictator of the world. He doesn't care about the world. But His investment is His investment is you can't call that poverty. Okay, there's something more. The Hashem is going to be a king. And when He becomes a king, there's a huge additional investment. Where is the poverty? Now, the same way, says the Rebbe, I asked the question 3 times before. You can't call a Yid an Rosh Hashanah min hameitzar. You can't call Eretz Yisrael an Rosh Hashanah min hameitzar. You can't call Teirah Shabbat an Rosh Hashanah min hameitzar. You can't call Rosh Hashanah an Rosh Hashanah min hameitzar. The Gemara says, Rasha, all rich people should be as rich as the Hashanah is poor. So what the Rebbe does, he takes Pashat Maamar Chazal and Psukim and says, I don't see the poverty. Where's the poverty in Yidden? Where's the poverty in Eretz Yisrael? Where's the poverty in Teirah Shabbat? Where's the poverty in Rosh Hashanah? If the Rosh Hashanah is a reminiscence, a throwback to the first day of creation, the world was in a very good place on that day. So it's the same questions 4 times, right? And now the fifth is one more time. One more. And I don't have any time to read it to you, so I'm just going to tell it to you. Min hameitzar is not the beginning of a kapitel, right? Psalm 118, Kuf Yud Ches, doesn't start Min hameitzar. How does it start? Hoyd Lashem Kitev Kileilam Chaste. Yemina Yisrael Kileilam Chaste. Yemina whatever it is Bnei Aaron Kileilam Chaste. Yemina Yiri Hashem Kileilam Chaste. 4 times. Then you say Min hameitzar. So you start off a kapitel saying 4 times Kileilam Chaste. The Rebbe brings that the Frierdiker Rebbe says that it goes on the 4 worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetziras, it goes on Koyanim, Leviim, Yisrael, everybody's saying Kileilam Chaste. And the Rebbe says what Chaste means. Chaste is 72, which goes a whole bunch of stuff. And the Rebbe says, how can a kapitel Tilim, which starts with Heid Lashem Kitei Kileilam Chaste, Yemina Yisrael Chaste, Yemina Beisai Chaste, Yemina Yiri, what's the Min hameitzar? So the Rebbe basically, we just learned 5 pages of Maamar. 5 different ways asks the same question. That's how this Maamar starts. The Rebbe spends 5 pages telling us how, if you look in Torah, you'll see how wonderful the condition of Yidden is, and Yisrael is, and Teirah is, and Rosh Hashanah is, and Min hameitzar is. So what's the Min hameitzar? Now I gotta go, and you gotta go. We'll continue Thursday. What's going to be the answer? The answer is going to be that there's no end to how high you can go. The highest and the greatest madregis can still scream min hameitzar compared to a madrega higher. That's going to be the answer. But there's going to be a chap. There's going to be a chap, a moedendik chap. He brings a marshal. I'm telling this to you now because it's so moedendik. A mother hears her daughter in labor. A grandchild is being born. The mother hears the daughter in labor, and the daughter is screaming. So because the daughter screams, the mother also screams. What's going to be the point? The point is that the worse your life is, the deeper the scream. That's a fact. A person's life is good. They want better. So they also scream, but you can't scream like a person who has nothing. That was going to make an argument that's based on 2 nekudas. Number 1, whatever level you are, there are higher levels. And compared to the higher levels, you could scream in hameitzar. But there's a number 2. that when you're screaming min hameitzar, you're not only screaming min hameitzar because you want higher, but because you're a mother. And you see what's happening lower than you. And lower than you have a real min hameitzar. And that causes that no matter how high you are, when you cry min hameitzar, it's a true min hameitzar. That's the, so to speak, that's the rub of this maamar. That's the nekud of this maamar. That number one, whatever level you are, compared to higher, you could scream min hameitzar. But if you have everything and you want more than everything, how much pain are you in? So the Teretz says you're like a mother who's hearing her daughter in labor. It's in Kabbalah, it's Bina and Malchus. Higher level and a lower level. And because your daughter is in labor, you're not crying min hameitzar because of where you are. You're crying min hameitzar because you know that because you're not perfect, lower than you is really tzaddis. You get it? In other words, if we're all perfect, the lowest level is perfect also. If on the highest level we're a little bit less than perfect, our life isn't so bad. But the grandchildren, the lower it goes, the worse it gets. So on every level you can scream min hameitzar because it can always be higher. But because since you know that where you are there's min hameitzar, so you're aware that on levels lower than you there's a real min hameitzar. And that's how the cry has that visceral quality, that painful quality. Okay, I'll see you Thursday.